Hello and welcome. What you're about to witness is a low to no budget style film that depicts a fictitious trial in which Humanities textbook writer Gloria K. Fiero is accused of misrepresentation in her book's account of the Galileo Affair. Let us go now to the trial already in progress.
The trial of Gloria K. Fiero will now resume. This has been an unusual case. The defense has already presented its testimony first, correct? That is correct, Your Honor. We have already made the transcript of our case available to the jury. Very well, Mr. Prosecutor. If you'll please begin your case. Thank you kindly, Your Honor. The prosecution contends that in Ms. Fiero's textbook, The Humanistic Tradition, the defendant has described the Galileo affair in a misleading and, in some instances, fallacious manner. Oh! The prosecution calls its first and only witness, Miss Gloria K. Fiero. Will the defendant please take the stand? Yes, Your Honor. You've already been sworn in, and I'd like to remind you that you are still under oath. Now, Miss Fiero, could you please tell us, are you an expert on Galileo? No, sir. Then your field of expertise is? Humanities. Ah, yes. The study of the human condition. Noble field of study. Well now, let's get down to business. I'd like the jury to follow along in Miss Fiero's book, if y'all will. It's on page 114. Now, if y'all are situated, Miss Fiero, if you could, please, tell us what you wrote about a certain Giordano Bruno. Yes, of course. He was an Italian monk and philosopher. He was burned to death at the stake by the hands of the Catholic Church in 1600. And why exactly was he put to death? Objection, Your Honor. Relevance? Well, Your Honor, Miss Fiero states in her book that this was an attack by the Church on the new science. It would seem that Miss Fiero has decided to make this relevant herself. Overruled. The prosecution may continue. Thank you, Your Honor. Miss Fiero. In my book it states that Bruno believed the universe was infinite and other solar systems could exist. Anything else? Well, if you're having trouble remembering, according to my sources of Miss Patricia Vole and the European Graduate School, Bruno was tried and executed for heresy on such grounds as denying the divinity of Jesus Christ, that the Holy Spirit was the soul of the universe, on his pantheistic views of God, on the possibility of existence of humans before Adam and Eve, speaking ill of Moses, habitually speaking blasphemies, doubting the virginity of Mary, practicing magical arts, and on his belief in the Copernican system. Now, I don't know about you, but it sounds like the church was more concerned about his ideas on religion than on his beliefs on the solar system. Perhaps I treated his case a tad briefly, in order to focus more on Galileo. Maybe. Or you could have been setting the tone that the church was out to get scientists. Objection! Order! Mr. Prosecutor, due to the relevance, we'll keep your evidence. But from now on, if you could stick to the subject of Galileo. Why, certainly, Your Honor. Miss Fiero, you state in your book that Galileo was forcibly removed from his position at the University of Pisa, correct? Yes, that is correct. Do you happen to have your sources handy? No, I'm afraid not. Interesting. In our investigation, we could find no evidence of his forcible removal. However, according to our sources, Michael Fowler, a physics professor at the University of Virginia, and Albert Van Helden, the curator of the Galileo Project at Rice University, they tell us that Galileo left Pisa for a more prestigious position at Padua in the Venetian Republic. Basically, in today's terms, it'd be like going from a professor to a department chair. Of course, if you could produce your sources, we'd gladly drop this from your charges. Have you nothing to say in your defense? You have nothing to say at all? All right then. Moving along. You state in your account that Galileo was dragged to Rome. You do know he went of his own volition, right? He was threatened to be arrested and taken in chains if need be. True. Kind of an empty threat though, since he went on his own. Galileo was a deeply religious man. It wouldn't have been like him to disobey an order from the church. You then say the actual trial was long and unpleasant. That's correct. According to our sources, the trial lasted 2 months, in which Galileo was called to testify only 4 times. He wasn't even imprisoned in a cell. 2 of our sources note that he was put up in a luxurious apartment at the Tuscan embassy at the Vatican. He was threatened with torture, though. Your Honor, everyone who was brought before the Inquisition was shown the instruments of torture. It was a formality. All of our sources say that no one ever intended to use them on Galileo. But he was forced to admit his errors. From what we uncovered, Galileo was found guilty of venomously suspect of heresy, because the cardinals felt that he had presented the Copernican system as truth, despite a 1616 injunction claiming that the Copernican system is just a hypothesis and cannot be considered truth. The Church, you see, never took the position that it was heresy in the first place. Your Honor, that's why his sentence was imprisonment, and house arrest at that. Miss Fiero, do you know who took care of Galileo after the trial? It was the Archbishop of Siena. Oh. That's right, a high-ranking man of the church. And even after that, in his villa outside of Florence, he was supervised by officers of the Inquisition. Oh. You see, Miss Fiero, it was the church who took care of him for the rest of his life. Well then, Mr. Smarty Lawyer, can you tell us why the church made such a big deal about this? Why, so glad you asked. There's a couple of theories floating around out there. Mr. Johnson and Mr. Little believe that Galileo had defied the 1660 injunction and was purposely insulting the Pope Urban VIII in his book, The Dialogue. Mr. Fowler believes it was due in part to squabbling between the Dominican friars and Jesuit priests, because they couldn't agree on the Copernican system. Mr. Miller posits that it was Urban VIII, who was in a politically unstable position due to the effects of the 30 Years' War, and he used the Galileo trial to strengthen his position. It could be all these things. We'll never really know. Mr. Little's account relates the church acted accordingly and was lenient on Galileo given the circumstances. All of these things seem to be in direct opposition to Mrs. Fiero's account. The prosecution rests. Thank you, Counselor. Closing arguments? No, Your Honor. Just one little thing, Your Honor. Now, you fine members of this jury, I'm sure y'all been taking notes this whole time. If y'all could just think about what y'all read in your book and the evidence presented here today, deliberate a little bit, and write guilty or not guilty on a piece of paper and hand it to your foreman, Mr. Watley. We'll put justice in your hands.